I'm realizing now I forgot to tell you
Oh,
what is actually the most interesting part of the story with when I was at therapy. So I'm 19 at this point. I'm struggling in the aftermath of my mom's death. I have anxiety. I'm sad every day, so on for months on end. And at some point, just on a random day in therapy, where I haven't had any particular, nothing particularly has changed. He was really moved by something I was telling him about my mom and how it was affecting me, and he said that he thinks I have PTSD, right?
there you go. Yeah.
And I did not take this very seriously at the time. I didn't think anything of it, and I don't today, which is why I actually forgot to include it in the story. I often forget that this happened, but he actually
Right.
diagnosed me with PTSD, right?
And that happens all the time. And with children, it's called demoralization. That's one of the iatrogenic effects of therapy. So I talk about in the book iatrogenesis, which is when a healer introduces harm to the patient.
Mm,
And harm can come in any number of ways. You go in for a surgery and you pick up a MRSA infection, or you go in for an X-ray and you're exposed to radiation. So even helpful interventions carry risk, right? Well, with psychotherapy, of course, it can be helpful, but it also carries risks. A lot of people don't realize that. And what you just said, your therapist casually diagnosing you with PTSD, which is, by the way, on its face absurd,
yeah.
because PTSD is a severe condition. People have these absolutely serious, symptoms like these flashbacks in which they are truly disoriented. They believe they're back in the war, in the combat experience. This is not something that you might casually have, you might be casually diagnosed with.
Mhm.
But that kind of diagnosis goes on all the time. And with a child, it's very often that a child or adolescent will not only grab onto that diagnosis, but totally it will change their self understanding forever.
Mm,
That's it. I'm an ADHD kid,
mhm.
and it will limit them in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
So there can be real harm from that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, had I been the kind of person to latch on to a diagnosis as an identity, I mean, I could be, I could be like the insufferable person insisting that he has PTSD, talking to a war veteran, saying, "Oh, actually, I have it too. My mom died of cancer, and I was
Right.
diagnosed with it." Yeah, this is your point about iatrogenesis. That's the name of it.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's when a healer introduces harm.
Right. It's interesting because to assert that therapy is powerful, to assert that it can change your habits, your personality, and so forth for the better, would imply that it's powerful enough to change those things for the worse,
Right,
right? I mean,
exactly.
you can't
Exactly,
really
it
have it
doesn't
both
mean
ways,
that's exactly right. I mean, saying that it's powerful means that it can also hurt.
right?
That's just what it means. Otherwise, it does nothing. It's
Right.
ineffectual. But I don't think we believe that about therapy.
Right.
So then we have to acknowledge. Interesting, by the way, there's a big body of research on the harms of therapy, um, and every researcher knows this. What was interesting to me is few clinicians, few therapists were willing to either admit it or
Mm.
take it seriously. So they would deny. Some of them even would deny that therapy can harm. But you mentioned a sort of a therapy for grief, and when they have done, there are a series of studies they have done, including for grief counseling. Um, first responders, they have done these studies of those who went to counseling after a traumatic incident, those who didn't, burn victims, and even cancer survivors. And they have very often found that grief counseling and these kinds of support counseling can make people feel worse. They
Mm.
often do. Now, that doesn't mean everyone will be made to feel worse, but some portion of the population will be led to feel worse through grief counseling than they would have felt on their own if they just surrounded themselves with friends and family who were supportive.
And why is it that group therapy or one-on-one therapy might lead someone to feel worse?
Because there's something called rumination, which is a very unhealthy way to proceed. And it is rehashing endlessly in your mind sad thoughts and sad memories. It is an unhealthy pattern of thought. It's the number one predictor and symptom of depression, and you can encourage it in others. Now, you can make people sad by having them endlessly rehash their grievance, their pain, their disappointment, their bad memory. And unfortunately, sometimes that's what therapy does. That's, if a person is recovering from grief, if they're gradually adjusting, and we are built as human beings. I mean, if you look back at our history, we have gone, you talk about trauma. The story of humanity is of getting past trauma, severe trauma, but we get past it because we're built to. Now, that doesn't mean everyone will, or everyone will to the same extent. And it doesn't mean that some of us, especially as adults, couldn't use an extra person who's paid to talk to you, to help you through some things. Of course, I've been in therapy. I'm certainly all in favor of that if you think it's right for you at any given point. But the idea that it's important for everyone to go through, and by the way, you all have been through something hard. We will see you now Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Well, it's just as likely that a therapist will encourage a kid who's actually feeling better to no, stop. Let's go back and talk about your pain.
Yeah.